Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's video lecture on InDesign and using InDesign to create beautiful architecture portfolios. Last week we looked at some examples of the different types of themes and the different ways to use consistency to create and construct visual narrative. This week we talk about how to achieve that precisely using Adobe InDesign. Now I want to show you two key features of Adobe InDesign and the main reasons why we use this over any other industry-leading software. The big one for me is the live update tool. Now say for example I have this perspective here in the spread, but I decide I actually wanted the nighttime version of the image. I can right click in here, open with Adobe Photoshop. It'll take me over to my Photoshop file. I then change the sky, save that file, jump back over to InDesign, and you'll see it's automatically updated that file for me. Very powerful tool. If I did the opposite, I jump back in here and I decided that actually I preferred the daytime sky, save it again, jump back over here. I can go to my links tab, right click, update link, and we see that it achieves the same thing. So we can do it either way. We can either go from InDesign out and edit it, or if we were editing based on some feedback that we got from our lecturer or our own self-critique, do some editing, go back and update the links, and everything will already be in there. The reason this is so important is because once you've set out your spread, once you've put this image on the page, you never ever have to set it again. That's it. Once it's there, it is there forever. Doesn't matter how many updates you do to it, it's always going to be there, and it's always going to remember the crop settings. So if you've cropped this in a certain way, whatever it is, doesn't matter what you do to it, it's always going to live edit it, which is saving you so much time and resetting you out your spread again and again and again. The other thing that is so powerful about InDesign is that once you've got a few spreads, so for me, my consistent graphic layout is that I have a full bleed on one side and then white space on the other, which you can see again here, full bleed, white space, and then some banding to break that up, which we'll talk about in a sec. But once I've got that, I can just go over to my pages, copy that spread, and then drag and drop some other imagery into there. So say we wanted just this image here, or something like that. It's already ready to go. If we wanted instead this one here, we drag and drop. But because we've already set out our layout, it's automatically going to crop it to the size that we have there. So even if we had something more like this, or this, we can drag and drop anything into that area and it's going to automatically fill that zone there. So once we have our layout set out, all we need to do is drag and drop, and it's going to consistently use these same layouts that we have here. Very powerful. So we're going to do a few things now. We're going to make a cover page, a contents page, a basic spread like this, copy it over and change it up, and then add a few more things in and talk about the banding technique, how to check our links, and save InDesign. So let's go for it. Command N or Control N to start a new document. Then of course we're working in millimeters, so we are 420 by 297, that's our A3 sheet. Yes, we want facing pages because we want to be able to see our spread side by side like this, and only need one page for now, because remember we're going to use the copy pages technique to make our lives a whole lot faster. So don't worry about filling out 60 pages, just put in one for now. Alright. First thing we'll see when we open our InDesign document is a very similar workspace to Photoshop and Illustrator. We've got some tools over here, some properties up the top, and then another properties and pages panel over here. So instead of working in layers, we're now working in pages. These are the specific pages we're going to be printing and or putting into our A3 book. First thing I like to do is turn off the guides so that I can see exactly what I'm doing. So I've got this pink purple line here. If I do Command colon, it's going to turn that off. So you can see I can toggle it back on again if I want to. but I want to hide it for now so that I just see my A3 page. Then what I want to do is I'm going to set out my text. So I'm going to choose a font family. You'll see what I mean by that in just a second. Let's put some text in here. First word is portfolio. Next one, design 2 and methods 2. Curtin University Architecture School. Chris Newburn 2020. Alright, so now I want to center that. So I come over here, center it. I want to make the portfolio bigger, so just change the size to 21 for that. I want to make this smaller, that's going to go down to 9 point, which is my small text. And then because we're using a font family, which we'll see here, I'm in Futura Book, I can go all the way from a very, very light text all the way to a very, very, very heavy text, but it's all consistent within the same family. And remember, consistency is key in our graphic presentation because it means we focus on the architecture, not on the other things that are constantly changing around us. So we do want consistency. I'm going to make this a light. Actually, let's go ahead and make that a medium. So we'll make that a medium. I'm going to change my spacing, which says VA there. I'm going to change that out to 300. And I'm going to change my spacing of this one to 200. I'm going to bring that down to a light font. And I'm going to make these other ones light as well. I'm going to actually beef this out to 350 because I want those edges to sit side by side. I'm going to bring this one down to try 170. There we go, that looks pretty nice. Okay, now InDesign is amazingly clever in how it will automatically find center points for you. So if I hover around here, the pink line is going to show up, and then I know that I'm centered in the page. If I drag this frame up to there, nice and tight to the text, hold shift, bring it down, now I can center it to the middle. So I know that this is sitting perfectly dead center in the middle of the page. Next thing I want to do is I want to hide these frame edges. I just want to see what my page looks like. I don't want to see guides, I don't want to see frame edges. So I'll go up to View, Extras, Hide Frame Edges. That's going to turn that off, so now I can just see how that sits. If I need to see it again, I can just hover over it, or if I click it, it will show me the full frame edges. Click out of it, nice clean page, and that's looking pretty good. Now remember, relative to what theme you're working with, you might not want to be this clean, clear, architectural, crisp style. You might be more graphic, you might be more watercolor, you might be more book style, you might be more evocative narrative. Whatever it is for you, your cover page should give us an insight to what that might be from the start. So it should be emblematic of that. Alright, so I'm sticking with architectural, crisp and clear for now, so let's move on. Come over to our pages area. Holding Alt, I'm going to drag one page there so we can see that's copied that. Got my cover page sitting up there. Half a page here, and I want a full spread there. So I'm going to hold Alt again, drag it over to the side. That gives us a full spread. Now this is my contents page. I'll probably put an image over here later, but for now I'm just going to delete that, leave that white. We've got our text already set up for us here. So what I can do is just change this to contents, and then I can use these ones down here, design, hold down control and move this to give me a bit more room. Whatever that might be, site analysis, initial reading, urban acupuncture, iteration, process models, whatever. Then I go methods, case study analysis, first drawing set, sketches, diagrams, perspectives, whatever. And so we have our contents, which will sit there. Once we're done, bring our frame edge back in again, and then just make sure we're sitting nice and centered there. So if we drag that up, hover it in, pink and pink, now that that's sitting in the center of that page now, we have our contents page. Once again, should be emblematic of the type of theme you're looking at. So have a look at some other examples of what style you might want. So I've got my spread here, page 2 and 3. If I hold down Shift, I can click both. Then I want to use hold Alt again, drag a copy, so now I have another spread here. I don't actually want contents page right now, so I'm just going to delete that. I want to have a full bleed image and some white space. That's going to be my consistent graphic pattern for my folio. Big full bleed imagery over the right and white space on the left. So let's do that. I'm going to go back into here, and remember I want my PSD, I want the original Photoshop file, so that way I can live edit. Whatever changes I make to my Photoshop file, it's going to be live edited in here. So I drag and drop that in. Now InDesign is quite clever in what we use as our frame edges as a tool. So say for example, if we zoom into here, we just look at this one page for now. By the way, if we go over to View Display Performance, we can control what this image looks like. So if I change it to Fast Display, for example, it just gives us the outer shape. If I go to Typical Display, it's going to give us a blurry image, but we can still see what the image is. If I go to High Quality Display, it's going to do the full resolution of the image. So depending on the speed of your laptop, you might need to turn it down a bit to either a fast display or a typical, but I like to run it in high definition all the time so I can see what it's going to look like. Back to our frame edges. So you'll notice that when we click on our image, if we were to grab the frame edges and bring them in, it doesn't actually resize. What it does is it crops the image down to a particular point. So that's quite a powerful tool, because as you can see here, I've created a nice horizontal banded image, almost like a widescreen image of my perspective down there, just by grabbing the frame edges. If I pull that back out again, we've got that there nice and clear. If instead I double click inside, it brings up a red frame we can see now, a maroon frame. If I were to then resize, we can see that it is actually changing the size of the image. Same as Photoshop and Illustrator, you want to hold down Shift to make sure you're resizing proportionally so it doesn't get warped. Alright, if instead we actually want to resize the whole thing and change the frame edges, what we can do is click, make sure we're on blue frame, hold Control and Shift, and that's going to both resize and change the location of the frame edge. A lot of the time we're going to want to resize from the center. So for example, if we want to resize and make it smaller, keeping our frame edge coming in, so that we can bring it in and then make a copy, have a side-by-side or something like that, we can do that by holding Control-Shift and then press Alt. That's going to bring it in with both the resize and the frame edge. If we want to resize out, what I'm going to do so I can have a full bleed image is Control-Shift-Alt, but pulling outwards instead of inwards. We can see my page border is now going outside the edges of the sheet, which is what we want. I can then use the frame edges. InDesign's clever enough to automatically stop me by turning it green when I get to the edges there. You can see it goes green now, and then one more time, green now. And that's a beautiful full bleed image inside there. So I want to have a full bleed image next to a bit of white space. For this perspective, it's important to talk about a narrative that I've tried to create through my post-digital drawing. So I'm going to take that contents page text that we had there, but I don't want the big title. That's only for large titles at the cover page and the contents page. So now I'm just moving over to this smaller text. Jump into here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to say Surrealism on Sunday is the title of this perspective that I made. And I'm going to go over my text there. I'm going to jump over my Properties tab. I'm just going to click Fill with Placeholder Text. And you'll see that that's put some text under there. I can delete this one out now. And it's already copied that style that we were using before, Futura Light and 9 point. We want it to be nice and small in here, so we focus on the architecture. And it's already grabbed that style in there and it's filled it in with some text so that when I'm ready I can come back and do that later. That looks kind of nice, but if I bring my frame edges in, so that it's bounded with that title, you'll see that it'll automatically make it fill to that edge there, which looks kind of nice. And we'll talk more about the grid a little bit later. But lining up that text edge with the title there looks really good. And again, bring our frame edge nice and tight. Make sure it's sitting where we want it to sit on the page, dead center. And now we have a beautiful master spread. We've got full bleed on one side, white space on the other side. So let's copy that over. We're happy with that style of spread, so again, we'll hold down Alt on our pages, copy that in. I now want to create an architectural drawing full bleed on this side, and some black and white architectural drawings spread out over the page on this side. So even though this is white space, because we're dealing with black, white and grey in our line work on our architectural drawings, it'll still read as white against a full bleed image, even if we add architectural drawings there. So let's grab Studio Bright's section here. We can see, and that fills out full bleed. Because we put a grey tone underneath our drawing and then use white in the section areas, it actually still feels full bleed. Just like this perspective does here, it still feels like it's taking over this whole edge. And we can see it's still working nicely with that white text we had there. Important to note is that we're using scale bars instead of scale in our portfolio. Because we're going to be resizing a lot and moving things around to make sure that they fit, instead of just trying to have awkward scales like 1:16 or 1:242 or other such nonsense, just create a scale bar. So when you're in CAD, or if you did it in Illustrator, you would have a relative scale. So this is 0 to 5 meters. And then we know it doesn't matter how small we make this thing, that is always going to be 0 to 5 meters. So scale bar is much more effective for portfolio design. Alright, so we're happy with how that's sitting on the page now. I want to add some architectural drawings, so I'm going to delete that out. Then I'm going to add some of our axos that we had before. I'm going to use our frame tool to very quickly crop out the stuff that we don't want. Bring it into those edges. Once we're happy with that, I'm going to resize it down. You'll find that in a portfolio, drawings tend to look better when they get resized down. So I'm happy with that. Then we had 3 types of axos, your construction lines, the final line work, and hatches. To save us some time, I'm just going to take the hatches of these drawings, but you know what I'm representing here. Make sure that they're nice and evenly spaced on the page, and that looks pretty nice. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add some text, just a little annotation to each one of these. We're going to need to use some guides to set those out. First, let's add the first piece of text. So I want this one to be called construction lines. You can see that there. Now again, we just double check our text and make sure that's correct. So Futuro, we need to change that to light. And then I want to make that 9 point. All of my text needs to be 9 point outside of titles. Okay, so construction lines, I want that to sit nicely under this image here. That looks pretty good. Now, I want this to be in the same position for each one of these. I could just drag and drop and do it by eye, but it's not going to be perfect. So what we do in InDesign is use our very powerful grid tool. So we see these rulers here. If they're not shown at the moment, just hit Command R, Control R to show your rulers. If you drag from the ruler out, you can get a guide. And you see it's automatically turned our guides back on, which was Command colon before. So what we want to do is go into our grids and guides, and if they're locked at the moment, unlock them. We want to unlock our guides so that we can copy them and move them around. I want one on that corner, and I want another one, hold Alt, just at the edge of my text box there. And then I'm going to click both of them, hold Alt, move them over to the same point in the other 2 axos that we have there. And that's going to tell us where we put our text. Then I need a horizontal one, so I'll go up to this horizontal band that I have here, go underneath that construction lines text, move it so that it's much, much closer. And then we have it here. Let's bring it in a little tighter. There we go. Alright, so that tells us where we are. I'm just going to pull that down so that's nice and tight to that. Alright, now that we have our grid lines, we can hold Alt, move this text over, so it's the same type of text. This one's going to be finished lines. Use our arrow keys just to get it perfectly lined up. Alt, bring it over again, and then this one is patches and atmosphere. Use our arrow key to bring it back over again. So we can see now, because we've used grids, everything is perfectly aligned. The bottom of all of these drawings is touches, and the text is in the same position relative to the drawing for each one of these. So if we turn this off, we can see that it really makes it beautiful and clear on the page here. Really looks very, very nice. We zoom out again. As part of the spreads here, we can see that full bleed and white space and full bleed and white space are working very well in terms of the harmony and in terms of the consistency of the graphic narrative we have there. Okay, so let's say we've got a couple of these consistent layouts, this pattern of full bleed versus white space. Every now and again it's good to break it up, and usually the way we do that is with a banding technique. So let's create a new spread. What I want to do is create some banding of images that we have in here. So first thing we want to do is delete this stuff out. Delete that out. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of images that sit inside here. And again, InDesign, very powerful at doing this. So let's go to my Ruckus Hill. Say, for example, we want a series of 4 perfectly equal squares inside this image, which will take up a horizontal band inside this. What we can do is take the first image, and then we're going to turn that into the square that we want, and we'll copy it, and then we'll drag and drop the other image. So let's do that together. We've got this image selected. First thing we want to do is convert it into a square. We can see that the properties are over here. We can see the width and height, 89 by 111. What I want to do is I'm going to change it to a central reference point. So that means if I change anything here, so let's say for example I change that to 50, it's going to do that centrally. If instead I had that in the left hand side, 50, it will only take up the right hand side of the image. So we want to adjust this centrally. I just want to make that 89, so it's a round number at the moment. Then I want to change the height of this image to be 89, so it's 89 by 89, a square. I want to see the bottom half of this image, so I'm going to hit the bottom reference point here, change this one to 89, and you'll see that it's cropped off the top there now. So I'm happy with that. I've got my 89 by 89 square. Now I want 4 of these across the page here. So let's do that. Hold down Alt and Shift. We're going to drag these over. I want a relatively small gap between each one of these. If I do that again and I hover, you'll see that InDesign is automatically snapping it to where we have that same size gap. Very, very intuitive and easy. Do it one more time. I can see that it's snapping, same size gap. And I now have a series of 4 images of identical size with equal spacing in between. I then center these vertically and horizontally, and I've got a beautiful banding across that central plane. Now all I need to do is drag and drop. I want this image, I want this image, and I want this image. Now, you can see something isn't quite right with this one here because it was a different proportion. All we need to do for that one is bring it down and then resize it, make sure that it's what we want inside the image, and then perfect, voila. We have our beautiful series of 4 square images sitting inside the page there. This is what we call banding. So we take out the central zone here, horizontal band. Alright, now let's create a text box. So let's say, for example, we've called this Brilliant Hues, is the name of this image that we have here. Again, we go over to our Properties tab, make sure it's what we want. We want Light, Futura, and we want it 9 point, and we want it centered to the box. we can then drag and drop this. It's going to perfectly line up using this grid tool, guide tool, to the center of that image. Once we're happy with its vertical location, hold Shift and Alt, and then we're just going to drag it out to where we get that green snap line for the center of each one of these images. Green snap line is in there, equal parts, and then we have this beautiful banding. We would change the text of each one of these so that it's representative of what we're doing here. That is a beautiful banding technique that we can create there. We might then say we need another version of this over the other side, so we might do a full spread of banding, but instead of creating imagery in this, we might turn each one of these into a different architecture drawing, or each one of these might be a sketch that corresponds with something that's going on over there, but the banding across the whole spread breaks up this pattern of full bleed and white space. That's one way. Let's have a look at another type of banding using our architectural diagrams. So I'm going to copy this one over. I'm going to delete this out. Then I'm going to bring in my diagrams. And remember, we want the original file so that if we make any edits to it, it's going to live update. So I've got my Studio Bright diagrams here. There they are. Now, what I can do is I could go back into Illustrator and edit each one of these so that they sit in a nice horizontal band, or I can just actually use the very powerful framing tool, which is what I'm going to do. So I'm going to copy this over here, going to band just those ones, and sit them over here, going to copy this one again. This time I want just that central section in the middle. You can see that. Move that one over here. Get it nicely lined up so we've got our text lining up down the bottom. Center it in the middle of the page. Then last one, I want these two bottom diagrams down here. And for consistency, I want one more diagram there. So I'm just going to copy that again, holding down Alt. And I'm going to double click inside there and just pan over. So I've got my axo, and then I'm just going to reframe it so that it fits my axo in nicely. Oop. Drag it over there. And voila, bring that over, get our text lining up. And you can see, because I was already lining my text up in Illustrator, I don't actually need to go and do any further editing to line these all up. All of the text is already aligned, and I was already using 9-point light Futura, so it's already ready to go. If you find that your text isn't working to what your new document is in InDesign, all you need to do is bring your framing up, then put in a new text box, whatever you need. Make sure it's what you want as your 9-point Futura with light, and then you would simply drag that over to each one of these. If you wanted to, you could use a grid guide to make sure that you're being consistent, which you can see there, I've got that turned on. And that's how we create a series of architectural diagrams. So I'm just going to undo that just to talk about this. So because we've used the banding technique, it actually gives a lot more breathing room to these diagrams than the original grid that we had. Now we read each one of these individually, and very much like a narrative from left to right, we understand the architecture more as we go through each one of these diagrams. So it's a powerful technique, the banding tool. So we've got our banding, we've got our different type of banding, which was this imagery here. We've got our full bleed imagery, which uses a scale bar, some architectural drawings over there, and some perspective and white space over here. So we're finding that we have some consistency. Once we do a few of these, we might copy a few more down and then do another banding, copy a few more down, do another banding. Much like the examples we talked about before, there's consistency in the pattern. Now I want to talk about links. Now, if you were to change the location of any one of these files, it's going to cause an issue for you. And you will have a very, very, very pixelated image, and when you go to print it to PDF or print it out on paper, it's going to look terrible. So I'll explain what I mean by that. So our links are over here just next to the Properties tab, and we can see because this one's selected, it's telling us exactly where it is, and there's some information about it as well. So if we go back over to this file where we know that that image is, if we were to change the location of that image, which is this one here, to one folder back, we'll click that again, and we've got a whole bunch of red. When we go to PDF or print that later, it's going to come out super pixelated and look terrible. So we need to do one of two things. What we can do is we can simply relink the Studio Bright all instances by just going to here and showing it the new file location. So double click it, and then everything's better in there. Or if I was to move that image back into its file, so it's moved again. Now we've got our Upset InDesign links again. What I can do is actually just shift it back out to the folder, or put it back into the folder, I should say, where it was originally. And you'll see that InDesign automatically refines it in the folder. So you've got two options there. If you've accidentally moved it, you can move it to where it was originally, or you can relink it to its new location, and InDesign's smart enough to relink the files for you. Same thing if you do any editing to your architectural drawings. If it's not automatically updating, you just come into your links, right click, update link, and that'll fix it for you. So we've created a beautiful document. We have some consistency in our theme, consistency in our fonts and our text, and we're really powering along. I want to show you another type of image page. So the banding or the full bleed and the white space doesn't always work for the types of drawings that we've created. And like we would have seen in Dion's drawing set last time, sometimes we have a whole bunch of perspectives and text and icons and sketches and diagrams and other stuff that doesn't fit so nicely in either the band or the full bleed and the white space. So I want to show you one more version. So let's copy this down. I'm going to delete this side. Then let's come into our images here. I want to bring in an elevation. I'm going to bring in a perspective, which is massive, as we can see there. I'm going to bring in a, what do we got here, a little plan. And I'm going to create a text box inside there as well. So I'm just going to grab this original one we have there, Control C, and then Control V inside there, so we have this text box that we created before. Now, already we've got a jumble going on here. We've got different size images, different orientations, different proportions. Nothing's working at the moment. So what we need to do now to make sense of all of this is to use our grid tools. And that is up here with our guides that we have. So the same thing when we brought our guides down before, we can do that. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to resize this image, Control Shift and Alt, just to get it to a reasonable size. When we have a page like this, we do what's called creating hierarchy, graphic hierarchy. So typically we'd have one big image, and then next to that larger image, we would offset that with increasingly smaller images. And we'll do that together. The next thing we want to do is actually set out some guides. So I want to guide this edge of this image that we have here. And then I'm going to make sure that this elevation that I have is conforming to that edge. So that way this top of the elevation is going to line up with the top here, which is important in generating consistency in a page that has a lot of imagery. Then I'm going to bring out my text box. I'm going to make it the same size as the width of this elevation I have here. And all of a sudden, that's making a lot more sense of these two elements. InDesign's going to resize your text and reproportion it for you, which is great too. And it's going to mean that I now have a nice edge along here that I can start using. So I'll bring this one over to my left hand side. Then I'm going to bring this plan over to that edge. It snaps in automatically. Hold Control and Shift. Oops, sorry, we're on Control and Shift. Command and Shift. I'm going to resize it so that it sits on this edge here. So you can see they are now conforming together. Then I've got a few options. I don't really like this edge here being slightly offset, so I can do one of two things. I can resize this one by recropping it, bringing it up to here, and then making it sit within that band. I can grab the images and then recenter them relative to that image, so we've got equal spaces top and bottom. Or if I wanted to, I could just bring this image down to this edge here, crop this down a little bit so that it's the same size as this image. You see those two green outer arrows at the moment are showing me that they're the same size, and then I could relocate this within that boundary and bring the text so that it's central within those two elements. And we can see that it's giving a lot more breathing room to the page now, all because we're using grids for the top edge, the side edges, and for the text or the other elements in between. To add a bit more hierarchy, I like to go a third scale. So let's bring in some of our images that we were working on before. So let's say we've got these three images over here. Going to drag and drop them over to here, holding down Alt so we copy them. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn my guides back on. I'm going to sit that right hand edge on that right guide, Control and Shift. I'm going to scale these down so that they sit on this left hand guide, and I can now bring them up into here. Surrealism on a Sunday moves up to its original elevation, and we can see that is quite a nice spread. If I turn that off there now, we've got a hierarchy shifting from big image to smaller image to smallest images, and they really sit nicely on the page once we do that. Again, we can play around a bit. We can shift these down to this bottom edge if we wanted to and reposition the text, or we could grab the whole thing here and shift it so that it's central within that image. It's up to you how you want to lay it out. It's up to personal preference. But that grid tool is very powerful in allowing us to make sure we have consistency in our pages. So whether we're using the grid to line up our text on our diagram series and our banner, or we're using it to make sure we're consistent in other imagery, we're using it to make sure that our texts are always in the right location, or whatever we're doing with our grids, you'll find that consistency that comes from that makes for a very, very powerful document. And already this is looking a lot tighter because we've got our nice edges all lined up around the page. We can shift this in and get that a bit tighter as well if we want to, play around with how that sits, up to you. The main priority is that our edges are all lining up. Our text is lining up with text, text is lining up with the banner or the outside edge of the frames, always making sure that they are lining up and they're consistent. So the final thing we want to do is check our spelling and check our links to make sure they're working before we then export out to PDF. So we saw here that we've got all of this red on our text because we've added in some infill text and lorem ipsum. We go over to Edit, Spelling. I've got my dynamic spelling turned on. So similar to if you're working in Microsoft Word or something like that, where as you're typing it'll tell you if you've spelled something wrong. Very, very helpful. If you don't want to see the red stuff while you're working, you can just turn that off. And at the end, when you're ready to go, you can do check spelling, and one by one it'll take you through the document and ask you, is this a word? Yes, that's a word, but is not a word, so I need to change that to something else, etc. And you just follow that all the way through the document. So it's up to you and your personal taste how you want to do it. I personally prefer to have my edit, spelling, dynamic spelling turned on. That way, as I'm working, I'm doing all of my spell checks. Then finally, we come over to our links to double check. What we want to see is that everything here says OK. We don't want to see any yellow or any red. Everything here should be OK as we're going through. If there's any yellow or any red, you need to click on it and figure out what the issue is, Most of the time it'll be relinking the file, or that you haven't updated the file after editing. So you just right click update link, or right click and relink it to show us where it is. Once our links are all done and our spell checking's done, we're happy that the visual narrative is there and it's showing all of our work from across the semester. Everything is nice and consistent, the layouts are working really well. We then go into File, Adobe PDF Presets, High Quality Print. We're going to call it InDesign Portfolio Test, and then save. It's going to bring up a dialog box here. The only one we really need to look at is compression. So if you're finding you have a massive file and you can't upload it, you can bring these ones down here, 450 and 450, bring those down to 300, and it'll do further compression to your file. But InDesign's automatically going to compress anyway. You can either export as pages or spreads, up to you. I personally like to have spreads in mine, but it's up to you how you want to do it as well. So if you didn't do spreads but you want spreads later, I'll show you how to do that. So let's just do it as pages for now. Export. You'll see that InDesign's doing our little background task at the moment. Once that's finished, that'll go away. I can go into there and find that document which I just did, InDesign Portfolio Test. That's looking very, very sharp, as we can see there. We've got our contents page, Surrealism on a Sunday. Everything's looking really nicely laid out, nice and consistent. So I want to see a 2-up spread though. So if I go into View, Page Display, and 2-page view, it's going to do a side-by-side. And then if we go back up, it will have portfolio as an individual page. So the contents page is individual. If that's not showing as individual for you, you can just go over to View, Page Display, and make sure Show Cover Page and 2-page view is checked. And then that way it would be done. Then you can do a Save As. Then that way we will open it as our thing, as our 2-page view, which we can see there looking lovely. And that is how we create a beautiful architectural portfolio using InDesign. That's all for now. See you very shortly.